Good morning. My name is Hannah McCarthy, and I'm a committee woman, except I just found out that, so my husband and I we bought a house across the street, and apparently across the street is a different district, so we might have to be going for something else. I don't really know. We'll have to figure that part out. But I am so grateful today to be kind of emceeing and monitoring this town hall. So I think this is what, the fourth or fifth town hall, John?
One, yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully you guys are familiar with Zoom. If not, totally fine. Welcome. Good morning. Grab some coffee, whatever you need. So the way that Zoom works is you have a video. You can share your video. You don't have to. I will be keeping people on mute as there's a lot of background noise when there's a lot of people within Zoom, just trying to minimize that as much as possible. My dogs are sleeping, so hopefully no crazy dogs in the background. They're very small, but very mighty. So if you take your cursor, or if you're using a phone, you can kind of look through and find your chat feature. On a desktop, if you wave your cursor and scroll down, you'll see a little button that says chat. If you click on that, it should come up on the left side of your screen. On the iPhone, it's a little bit more involved. You kind of have to search a little bit more for it. I haven't been on my iPhone for Zoom in a while, so I can't navigate that for you just yet. But there is a way to use chat on your iPhone as well. So the chat feature is open for conversation if you want, but really I'll be monitoring it throughout the whole session for questions for John when we get to the Q&A section. So be sure to make use of the chat, just because we'll try to keep people on mute. So hopefully that makes sense, and if you have questions, please let me know. So without further ado, I'm going to be introducing John. So John Emmons has a background in manufacturing and engineering and has served Chester County for over 10 years in various roles within the Republican Party, including committeeman and area chair. He is married to Allison for over 39 years, going on 40. Is June or July?
July. Yep.
Awesome. And he has 3 children and 3 grandchildren. So John has decided to run for U.S. Congress for District 6 for our Chester County, and he's gearing up to serve this area. So welcome, and thank you, John, for being here. I'll hand it off to you to get started.
All righty. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you very much. Thanks for hosting and emceeing these. It's a big help to us. And folks, thank you for joining today. It's a gorgeous Saturday out. It looks like a lot of people went to the shore this weekend. It's starting to feel like summer. Things are opening up a little bit. So I think these times are going to be more and more challenging, but that's okay because we're recording all these, and soon we'll have these up on a YouTube channel that you can go whenever you have the opportunity and view them. So even if you can't sit in on these, you will have the opportunity of being able to see them after the fact. So again, thanks for being here. As we look at what's taken place over the last week, we still have a lot of things out there bubbling, a lot of heavy topics we're still dealing with. For example, we still see instances of COVID-19, especially when we look in other areas of the world. It's making its way through other populations. And here at home, on a local level, we know that, especially here in Chester County and Berks County, we still have this partial lockdown that has many businesses still not open and all those business owners suffering. So we can't lose sight of that. That remains an issue. We need to get our Pennsylvania economy open. So again, we can't lose sight of that. We've talked about that for the last 4 weeks. Those are the topics for the last 4 town halls. I wanted to pivot away from that today, but I don't want to take the emphasis off of the need to open up the Pennsylvania economy. On a national level, we continue to see protests. We see destruction of public and private property. We see ourselves wrestling with the issues at hand. And we actually even see an occupation or two. So obviously, there are a lot of things that the country is dealing with, and I'm afraid we will continue to deal with them for a number of weeks and months, and hopefully not years, but only time will tell. But as I think we all know, we all feel, this is a dangerous and critical time. And why I say that is that, you know, not only because of COVID and all of the other issues of unrest that we have, but to me, the key thing is that we are headed towards a huge election in November, an absolutely huge election. And the reason I say that, and I know most of you feel this, is that because in November, we will make a very critical decision. Now, what you'll hear a lot from me today are 3 terms, and you'll hear it probably 4 or 5 times, but I think many of the issues come down to security, freedom, and opportunity. That's what I've been talking around since I started running back in September. So we're going to talk a lot around security, freedom, and opportunity. And as you look at what's, you know, this election coming up in November, in my mind, it comes down to a fairly simple decision. Security, freedom, opportunity. We stand at a fork in the road. Which way are we as a country going to go? Are we going to go down the path of less security, less freedom, less opportunity? Or are we going down a much more positive path of actually more of the right kind of security, more freedom, and more opportunity? Obviously, by me running, I'm fighting for the latter. I believe very strongly that we need the right kind of security based on freedom, based on opportunity. So that's what a lot of my campaign is about. When you look at the underlying foundation for it, it is security, freedom, and opportunity. So today we're going to do things a little differently. As we've already mentioned, I don't have a guest on. It's just me. I will, and the topic for today are really principles, priorities, and policies. So I'm pivoting back a little bit more towards my campaign. It's been a while since I've talked to a broader group about what I stand for, but that's really what the primary topic is today. What do I stand for? So the agenda for the session today is pretty straightforward. It's going to be, why am I running? A little bit about my background if you haven't had a chance to be exposed to that. I don't really like talking about myself, but in this role, I need to help communicate a bit about myself. The key priorities that are guiding my thinking, and then Q&A. And the Q&A is obviously a key point of this. So what I will try to do is to work through those other points in roughly 20 minutes, and then leave as much time as possible for Q&A, because that's where the real value is for me, is for the Q&A. Now, before I jump into the first topic, there's a couple positive things I wanted to mention here at the outset. One is, on Thursday night, we had our first meet and greet in 3 months. Now that we're able to get back together, we're in the yellow phase, people feel a little more comfortable about getting together. We had a great meet and greet up in the Pottstown area on Thursday night. Great group of people were there, very good exchange of ideas. So that was positive. It's great to be back out, again, meeting with people firsthand as opposed to through a Zoom link. So that's one thing. Second thing is a bit of an announcement. We are coming out with a new 30-second video. It may be out this weekend. At the latest, it'll be out Monday. It's quite a good little video. It can serve as an advertisement on the media or through Facebook and that type of thing. So that will be coming out here in the next few days. So be on the lookout for that. I think you'll like it. So with that, let me jump into why I'm running. I think when you think about why I'm running, it comes down to a couple key concepts. First of all, plain and simple, is I care. I care about people, and I want to help hand off a better world to the next generation. To me, that's what it's all about. Us being responsible and handing off a better world to the next generation. I really want every child to be able to have the opportunity and freedom to pursue their dreams. And that's largely what's driving me, because as I look back over the last 40-ish years, I think the level of opportunity and freedom has been decreasing. So that's really why I'm driving. I want every child to have that opportunity, whether it's a child in downtown urban Reading, or whether it's someone in the suburbs of Tredyffrin, or whether it's someone growing up on a farm outside of Oxford. Every child needs to have that freedom and opportunity to pursue their dreams. So that's the key point. Over my lifetime, I believe that I have seen a deterioration of that security, freedom, and opportunity. And what has concerned me over time is there seems to be a steady drift in that direction. And what I mean by that is, quite honestly, when we have Republican presidents, we tend to creep in that direction. When we have a Democrat president, we tend to jump in that direction, but always moving more towards bigger government, more intrusion into our private lives by that larger government. And when you have that type of a situation, you inherently have less freedom and less opportunity. So, and then when you also look at, on the one hand, you have the size of government growing and growing. You also have the other aspects of that tend to intrude on our lives. You know, one example is just political correctness. Your freedom of speech today really almost depends on who you are, because if you're one person, you get applauded. If you're another person with a different point of view, you get ridiculed and literally run off of social media and that type of thing. So our freedoms and opportunities clearly are less than they were. And if you need any evidence of that, just look at what's taken place in 2020. Between the COVID situation and the very unfortunate circumstances that happened with George Floyd and everything that stemmed from that, when you stop and you ask, do we have more or less security today? I would argue less security. Is there more or less freedom? Clearly, with what Governor Wolf has done, much less freedom, much less opportunity. So back around 2007, you know, I was working through my career, had a family, everything was going well, but I was continually frustrated with where the country was going. So I decided that I could no longer sit by and depend on someone else to do this for me, to go and represent me and do the right things. So back around 2007 and 2008, I decided I had to get involved. I had to get engaged. Sometimes we called it getting off the couch. I had to do it because I could no longer see the country going in the direction it was. So that's what I did. I got engaged. I became a grassroots organizer. I became much more involved with the Republican Party. I became a committee man. I then became an area chair. I started working on people's campaigns and helping them get elected. So that was about 12 years ago, and I've continued to do that over the last 12 years because I feel it's vitally important for us to be engaged, to make a difference, and to stop this creep in the direction of larger government and more intrusion into our lives. So I'll leave it at that for right now, because I don't want to spend too much time. I'm always told by my wife I go too long. I'm an engineer, so I always like to over-explain things. So I'll stop there, and if you want more detail on that, I'll be happy to answer it during the Q&A. Next, I want to go into a little bit more about who I am and give you a glimpse of my background. So I think the place to start is my upbringing. I was born and raised in central New York, up in the Finger Lakes area. I grew up on a small farm. I was the youngest of 5 kids. So I have 3 older sisters and an older brother. And I can honestly say my 3 older sisters played a very heavy role in my life because my mother, which I'll talk about in a moment, my mother actually passed away suddenly when I was 13. So between my 3 older sisters and my brother to a somewhat lesser extent, and my grandmothers, they all played a very, very important role in my life. So I think I was privileged to be the youngest of 5 because I got to see the mistakes that they made. I got to learn from their mistakes, and I didn't quite take maybe the bruising that they did. But I think that's very important. Again, grew up on a small farm, started working from a very young age. I remember one of my first jobs was to roll the bales of hay out from in front of the tractor so my mother could drive the tractor straight down the field. That's when I was about 5 years old. I started mowing lawns when I was 10. So that I actually enjoyed that. And then by the time I was 13, I was working 80-plus-hour weeks. Now you say 80-plus-hour weeks. Yes, I had a 48-hour-a-week job on a neighbor's farm in a vineyards, and he had a multifaceted farm. So I did that 6 days a week for 8 hours a day. Then when I came home, I would help my father on our farm, and that probably took another 20, 24 hours a week, if not more. And then I also was mowing 5 lawns at the time. So pretty much if the sun was up, I was working. Now, I'm sharing that all with you because it just underscores the fact that with that upbringing, I developed a very strong work ethic, and that has continued throughout my entire life. And that's vitally, I think it's vitally necessary for someone who's going to be in Congress, because to me, that's about a 14-hour-a-day job, if not more. Then as a child, I liked math and science. I also loved history and current events, but I liked math and science a little bit more. So I went to college for chemical engineering and then became a chemical engineer. I went to SUNY at Buffalo. One story I wanted to share with you about that it provides a little bit of a window on me. Growing up in Central New York, I had a couple of choices for college. I was going to pay for my own college, so I had to make those decisions. So it kind of came down to, do I want to go to SUNY Buffalo, which is part of the state system? And at the time, that was about $2,500 a year. Or should I go to Cornell? Cornell had a big name. It was closer to home. It was only about 40 minutes away. But when I looked at it, Cornell was $10,000 a year. So $10,000 a year versus $2,500. So I looked at that and I said, well, what would I get for that extra money? And I looked it up and I found at the time, Buffalo was rated 18th in the country for chemical engineering. Cornell was rated 10th. So I thought for 8 points, it's not worth it. Since I'm paying for it, I'm going to go to Buffalo. And that has served me well the rest of my life. But I think that gives you a window on me being fiscally responsible, frugal, making those kinds of decisions. Graduating from college, as Hannah mentioned a moment or so ago, literally Allison and I got married right after college. And one of the funny stories about it was I had started work in Lancaster and I didn't have any vacation. So we got married on Saturday, July 5th, and then literally had to drive back so I could go to work. So we never had a honeymoon for about 14 years. And where we stopped for dinner on the way home was the McDonald's in Lewisburg. So, but yes, we've been married in another 3 weeks, we will have been married for 40 years. So it's been a great 4 decades, and it'd be nice to think there might be another 40, but I'll take 10 at a time. So it's been a wonderful ride. With Allison, we've had 3 children. Hannah mentioned that. Great kid. We've also had the great good fortune of having 2 of the 3 of those children in Lancaster, so relatively close. We also have 3 grandchildren. I think that's a key point. And let me share this with you. The key factor right now is 2. Why 2? Well, our oldest grandchild is 2 years old, just over 2 years old. The second grandchild is just over 2 months old. She was a COVID-19 baby. In fact, we still haven't held her yet, but we hope to very soon. And then our third grandchild is not with us yet. We count her as our grandchild because I believe life begins at conception. She is going to be born in 2 months. So we're in a very unique situation right now, 2, 2, and 2. But hopefully around the beginning of August, we will get to actually meet our third grandchild, and that one will be a grandson. So very good. Now jumping back for just a moment, with regard to my career, coming to Lancaster, I started working for Armstrong World Industries. I've had the great good fortune over the last 40 years then to have worked for 3 large, very good corporations. So I've had 40 years in the business world, almost exclusively being in positions of leadership with regard to manufacturing and operations. So I learned very early on where my interest lied was where the fusion of man and machine came together. So I moved into manufacturing management very early and then progressed quickly up to plant manager and director levels. So I think that's critical. And I think why that's critical for this campaign is through those 40 years and the 3 companies I've worked for, I've had the great opportunity to build very good, strong organizations, lead teams, and solve problems. And I think that's what we need more of. We need more people in Washington from the private sector who have had a career and have had to fight to survive, to solve problems, and that's critical. And that's what I would bring to this role. Just to give you a feel too, I think this is important to understand. During my time in these 40 years, I've had the opportunity to either live or work in or supervise manufacturing sites in quite a number of different places. And I think that gives me a great perspective on not only the United States, but also on the world. So for example, I've been in Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, Illinois, New Jersey, Delaware, Texas, New York, Iowa, Germany, and India. So I think that gives me a lot of good experience in different peoples, how different peoples think, slightly different cultures. And it gives me a real appreciation, more so than ever, for the United States of America and the beauty of federalism and how that comes together to make us a stronger entity. So I'll stop there. I think that's enough of my bio. There's more available. I can answer more questions, but I think that gives you a little bit of a feel for who I am, my background, what I stand for in regard to background. But now moving into what I stand for more from a policy and priority standpoint. Again, I want to start this off by saying everything is couched in terms of security, opportunity, freedom, those 3 points. So let me start off by saying, I already mentioned this, but I'll say it just to reiterate it. I am pro-life. I believe very strongly in life. To me, life is precious, life is sacred, and I think we need to protect life at every turn. One thing I would say is I think we need to be talking more about life at the end of life. Usually the conversation is around the unborn. That is very critical, absolutely critical. But we need to have more discussion around end of life. And we saw some of that here recently. We continue to see it, quite honestly, with regard to COVID-19. Were the right considerations taken for putting someone who is infected with COVID-19 back into a nursing home? Do people really value life as people approach the end of life? We need to. Having a conversation with a fellow yesterday, a very prominent veteran, and he was telling me about the disasters in the VA homes and hospitals. It's a disaster. So, it's important, very important, that we continue to talk about life from beginning to end. I'm also very strongly pro-family. I think that family is critical. It's one of the bases for our government. Government starts with us as an individual. Beyond the individual, then it moves to the family, and then goes from there. So family is critical. I'm also a very strong proponent of the Second Amendment. I've said this a number of times. I'll say it until the end of my days. To me, the Second Amendment is the most important amendment. Yes, to me, the Second Amendment is even more important than the first. Now, why do I say that? Well, to me, without the Second Amendment, you would not have any of the others. By this time, after 240 years, if we did not have the Second Amendment, I really, truly believe that we would not have the others. The others would have been taken away. So I will always fight to defend the Second Amendment. I'm also very much a free market, free enterprise person who believes very strongly in competition. And that's a key point. As a legislator, how do you approach being a legislator? Do you rely on government programs, or do you rely on a more basic thing like competition to provide the right constraints? with any legislation I would ever be involved in, I will always ask the question, especially if someone says, well, let's have a government program for it. To me, the bells and whistles go off, and we really need to step back and look at that. To me, the question is, how can we introduce competition or even reintroduce competition into this issue so that the invisible hand is what guides it, not a government program. Government program typically means someone is picking winners and losers. It's a free market that really should dictate winners and losers. So I will always fight to introduce competition or reintroduce competition into a particular situation. As you heard earlier, I'm very much a proponent of fiscal responsibility. I started a blog 10 years ago, 12 years ago now, and one of the key issues was the national debt. And since that time, the national debt has only gone from 9 trillion up to over 25 trillion. It's a huge issue. People aren't paying enough attention to it. I will. It's the next huge crisis that is on just over the horizon, and people don't pay enough attention to it. I will. Also, as you can probably tell, I'm a smaller government type of person. I don't think the federal government should have as much power as they do. I think government should be smaller, it should be local, and that's what I would always fight to do. I believe very strongly in lower taxes and less regulation. To me, the lower the taxes, the less the regulations, the better environment it is for business. With that environment, you create good jobs, you have a stronger economy, it creates for a stronger nation overall. Now, the next thing I want to mention is one of the things that is near and dear to my heart is health and healthcare reform. So why would I want to talk about health and healthcare reform? Well, quite honestly, to me, one's health, each of us, our health is really what dictates the quality of life that we have. And my big concern, especially as I've watched this over the last 4 decades and see what happens in other countries, we continue to move towards a single payer system. Any place that's had a single payer system has seen the same thing happen. You have an issue around accessibility, you have issues around quality of healthcare, and you have issues around the cost of healthcare. And I again believe that we need to reintroduce competition into that. I could spend half an hour and go through a number of different steps, but we need to seriously look at our healthcare system and find a way of reintroducing competition into many aspects of it. And then, and only then, will we get back to where we have the right kind of healthcare based on doctors and patients' relationships and not on what insurance companies or what a government has to say. So that's big on my priority list because I think it is so critical. Also on my priority list, and this probably won't come as a surprise to anyone because of my manufacturing background, but I think it's absolutely vital that we continue to grow good jobs in the economy. Why do I say that? Well, to me, what makes a nation strong really is its middle class. And how do you go about having a vibrant middle class? I contend that you cannot have a vibrant middle class if you have too much of a reliance on a service economy. So what we've seen over the last 20, 30 years as manufacturing has left and gone elsewhere, while in some ways it looks like our economy is strong, we've also seen here recently where it probably wasn't as strong as what some people thought. Why? Because too much manufacturing went elsewhere. So for good jobs, because manufacturing jobs tend to be well-paid jobs, so for the opportunity of a good job, for the security of the job, I believe that we ought to really work hard to bring manufacturing back to the United States. I put out a proposal for that back on April 21st. I won't go through that today, but it's very, very critical to our national security, to our personal security, to our job security, that we do a much better job of bringing manufacturing back here and keeping it. So I would encourage anyone to go on Facebook and go back to April 21st and see what we proposed, but it's very critical. Now, the other aspect of good jobs, growing the economy what have you, is that I believe that a growing economy is the only solution we have to our financial, I'll say, situation. I won't call it a crisis quite yet, but we're very close. And why do I say that? Because I think the only viable answer is to slow the rate of government spending. I would love to cap it. I don't think that's quite feasible, but I think we can slow it down to a very small increment. But then I think the answer is to grow the economy at a rate in 3%, maybe 3.5%, which I think is very doable, especially by lowering taxes and getting the government off the backs of people with regulation. So by doing that, we can grow to a balanced budget, and we would do that very quickly if we could ever quit increasing the size of government spending by 3, 4, 6% a year. So I think that's why I feel that growing the economy is very critical, because I think it's a major element to the solution to our financial issues that are with us today, but maybe not recognized, but they will definitely be with us tomorrow. A couple other things quickly. I won't go into quite as much detail. I want to get on to the Q&A, but another one of the things we need to deal with, it's not maybe quite as prominent today, but we can't let it go away. We need to work on our immigration system. I believe we have a broken immigration system. There's many elements of it that need to be improved. So that's something we can't lose sight of. And for everyone involved, whether it's an American citizen or people trying to come here, there are things that need to be improved. So it's a more secure situation for everyone. The right freedom is involved and the right opportunities involved. Again, those 3 words. Another thing that I'll mention, which isn't mentioned all that often, is environmental conservation. Growing up on a farm, especially a small farm, it was just bred into me. You didn't waste anything. I learned at an early age what lighting a light bulb's like. I went to a science fair and I jumped on a bicycle and started pedaling to light up a light bulb, and I saw just how much energy was required to start a light bulb. So throughout my whole life, I have been very much environmentally conscious from a conservation standpoint. Don't waste. Waste not, want not. So I would bring that to this role as well. I do it in my own personal life. I could give you a 15-minute expose on that. In my work life, we work every day to reduce waste, to use fewer materials. We have goals every year to reduce our electricity usage by 3 or 5%. We've reduced the water usage in our plants by 30%. When I say that, when I got to the job, we used 1 million gallons a day in 3 different plants. Today, we only use 600,000 gallons a day. So a huge decrease. It's good practice. And what I would say, what I would contend, is what we need to focus on is conservation, not on disruptive things like the Green New Deal, but focus on things that are more conservation oriented, things like habitat destruction, extinction of species, and that type of thing. Something we can do something about right now and it makes sense, and not chase off after something as frivolous as the Green New Deal. So I believe in that very strongly. And lastly, what I would say is the world needs a strong America. I still contend to this day, and I will contend forever, that America needs to be the light to the rest of the world. America is the only one that has this strong Judeo-Christian foundation, along with the financial and economic strength to be an example to the rest of the world. Not in any kind of an imperialistic way or anything like that, but just to set an example for here's what life could be. So I believe very strongly in a strong America. So just having said that, I will end this portion by saying that I am a supporter of President Trump. I think his focus on bringing America back again and getting it in a position to where it can be the light to the rest of the world, I think is very important. So so I just wanted to make sure I state that. That usually comes up as a question. Yes, I do support most of President Trump's initiatives and policies. And I've heard it summed up recently in a way that I kind of like. It's jobs and judges. When you look at many of the things that President Trump has done, It's been freeing up companies, freeing up the environment so that more jobs could be created. And we saw that working very well all the way up to the middle of February. So those policies work, they really work. And then from one of the other dangers that we have in this country is our judicial system and activist judges. So I think it's very positive that we have had the appointments that we've had, not only on the Supreme Court, but also on the other federal courts to help with the drift that we saw within the court system. So I'll pause there, take a breath, and I think some questions hopefully have come in. So we'll jump into the Q&A. Hopefully everyone has been able to find the chat button. And if you did have a question, pass it along to Hannah.
Awesome. Thank you. I have a few questions here that are pretty great, as always. So this first one says, please talk about, number one, the prospect for debates with Chrissy Houlihan, and 2, activity towards getting help with campaign from National Party infrastructure, including POTUS endorsement.
Okay. The debates, no, there hasn't been any communication yet between our 2 campaigns around this. And at this point, typically they are sponsored by the League of Women Voters, but I think that will happen very soon. If it doesn't happen, we will force it to happen because we want debates. I don't know whether she will engage on that. We will try to make that happen. I think it would be very healthy because I think what I stand for and what her record is very different. And there's a very distinct difference around that. The other thing I will say around that, I think it's important for people to see us live and unplugged. And the reason I say that is, as you can tell here, I believe in transparency. I believe in making myself available to you. I'm interviewing for a job, quite honestly. I mean, I am interviewing for a job where I'm your servant. I'm your representative. I should be available to you. When I look at Chrissy Houlihan, she's available from a media standpoint, but she's not necessarily available to have this type of a discussion. When she does a town hall, she's very scripted. She doesn't want to go off the script. If a question comes to her that she doesn't like, they don't ask it of her, or she says she'll get back to them, and in many cases she doesn't get back to them. So there is a very stark difference between the 2 of us, and I think people need to see and feel and understand that. So yes, we will be reaching out and trying to have those debates. Whether they're accepted or not, only time will tell, but that will be coming up here shortly. And to think about the time frame, I would be thinking about September. And why do I say September? I don't want to wait until October. With mail-in ballots this year, many people will have made their decision by the end of September. So I think people need to focus more on September than October, but that would be the time frame that typically they're done. So with regard to support from, say, the Republican Party, we continued in different ways to reach out, and we started reaching out back in October. We continue to reach out now, and what really happens in this process is that what they're looking at is, it's on the basis of probabilities. So I would say still to this point, for the most part, the Republican Party is focused on what we call level 1 races. And I don't like that, but I understand it, being the scientist I am. They think the best probability of winning back the House is in situations where Donald Trump won the district in 2016, but then a Democrat won in 2018. In our case, in the PA6, Donald Trump didn't win, Hillary Clinton won, and then in our case, Chrissy Houlihan won, so you have Democrat, so that puts us in a level 2 category. So quite honestly, what needs to happen is we have to take it to them. And what do I mean by that? Well, we have to show them that it's a viable race. And that's done by polling. So we did polling back in March. We showed that we were within striking distance. And now we're getting ready to do another poll here in June, because what we don't know, I mean, there's all sorts of, you hear what the media says, you see what's in the newspapers. I don't believe any of it, quite frankly, when it comes to polling, because I think people aren't answering polls correctly. They're not being engaged. So the only way to know is to try to conduct a bona fide poll. We will be doing that in June. If we show that we have narrowed the gap and see what the impact has been of our efforts along with COVID-19 and all these other events, if we can show that we've narrowed the gap even more, we will get the support of those groups, whether it be the NRCC or the RNC or the state GOP. That support will be there if we can demonstrate that we're narrowing the gap and this is a contested race.
Wonderful, thank you.
All right, another long answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. Super helpful. All right, so next question is, how long will the court take to resolve the impasse between Wolf and the legislature?
I have no idea. I hope it's quick. We have to bring this to a head quickly. And it certainly appears the legislature is doing everything they can. Wolf is doing everything he can to hang on to that power. And he recognizes now that his only opportunity is through the courts. So that goes back to my point before about the court system. We haven't paid attention to the judicial branch for way too long, but we've been seeing certainly the last 10 years, how critical that is. So when there's an election for a judge for the Court of Common Pleas or for the state superior court, that type of thing, it's critical that people get out and vote, do their homework, and vote for good judges, because in this case, a judge could choose to rule more quickly or drag their feet and politicize this. And it all kind of depends on who's in place. And because we've been asleep too long, we have way too many activist judges in the system from bottom to top.
Thank you.
Challenges.
This one's going to be a tongue twister for me, but I'll see if I can get this right.
Okay.
With our debt now at 26 trillion, consecutive Congresses keep passing huge, wasteful, and pork-laden omnibus appropriation bills. What are your thoughts on this spending and entitlements?
Well, spending, okay, you guys have half an hour? It makes me sick. When I think back to 2009, 2008, 2007, when I was doing my blog on the national debt, back then, if we had gone to the penny plan, which the penny plan is reducing the federal spending by 1% a year, which in my mind would be trivial to do. The politicians would make it look like it's the hardest thing to do. I'll address that in a moment. But we would not have only by now, we not only would have balanced the budget, but we would have been within 5 years of paying off the national debt. We would have done it by 2025. But what did we do? No, we just keep raising the debt limit. We keep expanding. And what people don't realize is that that's going to come back sometime, somehow. And what I mean by that, and I'll try to be brief, either we have to pay it back or we default or devalue the dollar. Any way you look at it, people are going to be hurt. It's going to create a crisis. So my answer is, I want to, I mentioned this earlier, as much as I would like to cut spending, I don't think it's politically viable in this country right now. But what I think we could sell people on is, let's stop increasing the size of the government spending, limit it to maybe something on the order of 0.5% a year. So there may be a little bit, but not as much as we have been. So do that on the one hand, and then grow the economy. And you saw this happen with Donald Trump when he was growing the economy. If we hadn't grown the size of government, we would be much closer to a balanced budget right now. So to me, that's the key. We have to stop increasing the size of government and then let the economy grow into that. Now, one final comment on this. I believe in my heart that somewhere between 20 and 40% of federal spending is wasted. So I think there's a huge opportunity when you talk about entitlements and different things. I think we need to deal with the entitlements. I don't know what the whole solution is, but we have to deal with it because of the promises that have been made and the way we've been dealing with it. It's just a number so big that our heads couldn't get around it. So we have to do something about that in an intelligent fashion. But I think the other key aspect of this is that if you really think in terms of 20 or 40% being wasted, that gives you a lot of latitude to move money from one pursuit into something that is something that creates more value. And even if it's 20, if I'm wrong and it's not 40, but I'd be willing to take about $1 million wager on that based on my career in 40 years. There's things that you can do. So long-winded answer again, I apologize, but there's far more opportunity than what most people realize. Because of that wasteful spending, we can repurpose that money into things that create more value for us as Americans.
Thank you. It's a lot of money.
Get your head around it. I think you guys probably remember the old graphics about how much $1 trillion was. And you had $100 bills stacked on pallets covering a football field, and maybe 2 deep, I forget what it was, and that's 1 trillion. You know, when you stop and you think about it, our economy is roughly 20 trillion now, and yet the national debt is 25, 26 trillion. And I'll throw one more in because I think this will help some people understand the issue, especially millennials. So, you know, one of the issues we have with our younger generation is that many have taken on college loan debt. And now they're faced with situations where they have this debt, they need to pay it off. And they're being responsible about it, that's great. But what's that mean? If I'm having to make this loan payment, then I don't have that money to maybe buy a car, buy a house, buy a new couch, maybe go on a vacation. So yes, we're faced with the realities that you have to make choices. And so I think when you take that, and I know people are struggling with that, and that's a whole other topic, but we need to think about that from a national level as well. So right now we're living under a false umbrella because the interest rate is so low, the expense to service that debt is, I'll say, digestible, and I'll say that loosely. But if the interest rate ever went back up into the 4 to 6% range, where it traditionally was, then the amount of revenue that we would have to divert to servicing the debt would mean that we have that much less available for some of those social programs, for defense, for all the things that we want to do. So for all those reasons, we have to get our hands around the debt situation because it's going to absolutely strangle us. And we've seen what happens in smaller countries like Argentina and Chile and so forth. We are the reserve currency for the world. If you think the COVID-19 situation was severe, if we get into that type of a financial crisis, COVID-19 is going to look like a piece of cake compared to what a really deep, brutal economic catastrophe would be.
Thank you. Just in time for my dogs to stop barking for this next question. Here we go. So what measures can we implement to procure the Latino vote here in Chester County, which has a large population that does not seem to be getting the right info messages about Trump and how Trump can help them? What precautions and tools can we use to protect votes from voter fraud here?
Ooh.
That's a big question, but it's an important one.
I think the first question about how do we connect with that community, to me, it's not a short-term thing. To me, it's got to be something that we set out to do and do a better job of communicating. I think, and I think that's what it's largely communication and relationship building. Because I think when you step back and you look at what Republicans stand for versus what Democrats stand for, in many of those areas, the Republicans actually align better with the Hispanic community than the Democrats do. But I don't think over time, we as Republicans have done a good job really communicating with and knowing the right way to become part of the community. Back in December, I'll give you an example. Back in December, I sat down with a couple of the leaders up in Reading. And what they told me was the number one issue for the Hispanic community, on the one hand, they said, you probably think it's immigration. They said, yes, but not really. The number one issue is it's about having access to capital. And what they were saying is, this is a strong community. It's a very family-oriented community. They want to be able to build businesses so that they can grow and prosper and that they can employ people in their community. But they struggle in some cases with having access to capital. So I think in too many instances, we don't think in those terms. We don't engage. We don't really understand what they're feeling and what they need, and then work to help them on a broad scale. And I think that's what we need to do. Now, in the short term, that's going to be a challenge. I did start reaching out way back in December, and my plans were not only to continue to reach out, but actually to put up a parallel website that was all done in Hispanic to make it easier for people to get the message. Unfortunately, COVID-19 came along, and quite frankly, on that side, I've lost the better part of 3 months because we haven't been able to get together in groups. So we're going to pick that up again now and see how much progress we can make in the next 3 to 4 months. And hopefully we can make the progress. But I think we need to continue to do that just because it's the right thing. It's about security, freedom, and opportunity. And that rings true to any population. So we need to bring that message and really be sincere about it and help drive that with and for them. I think on the mail-in ballots and voter fraud question, it's probably the one biggest thing that scares me because I haven't been convinced yet that the safeguards have been put in place to prevent it. I think in our district, I think it would tend to be lesser, but I still think the potential exists. I think you all know that Judicial Watch sued Chester County back in April, I think it was, if not earlier, because Chester County had not been updating their voter rolls. So there's a lot of people on the voter rolls yet that should not be on there. I've yet to get a very strong answer from voter services as to how are they going to deal with mail-in ballots. What are all the safeguards? And do you have a process? Is it being monitored? Is it being followed? So that's an issue. I think I may have mentioned last week the experience I had. I purposely did a mail-in ballot for the primary so I could experience the process. And what I experienced was a very slow response. So I had to take mine in because I couldn't depend on the mail for it to get there. When I took mine to the drop-off place, the fellow who I dropped it off with didn't require to see my license. That is a requirement. He didn't. So that leaves the door open for people bringing in ballots, dropping them off, but not being questioned on whether it's theirs or not. So those are some of the things we need to do. Now, one thing I will mention, we will be having a change in leadership at the county level here. The former chair is stepping down. There will be an election here towards the end of June or beginning of July. And the new individual coming in, we are starting to work with him now so that when he takes office, assuming that he does get elected, that he hits the ground running on this issue. because he's going to have about 3 or 4 months to ask these same questions and to work with voter services and to see, do they have the safeguards in place? Are they rock solid? What are those monitoring systems? And hopefully he's able to join with the rest of us. We'll be there with him, but getting those safeguards in place so that we minimize the amount of fraud, it's absolutely critical. And we also need to do the same thing in Berks County because the same potential exists there. So in this case, we need to do it in 2 different counties for our campaign.
Thank you. All right, we have one last question here. How will you get through to people with the importance of your message with all of the emotion in the country right now? More than ever, people are focused on gender and race. Vote for someone who looks like me instead of understanding the issues and who can make America better.
Yes, well, there's the key to the whole campaign right there. So what we're trying to do, what we set out back in October, November last year, putting together a 4-dimensional model to do what you just asked. That model, basically the 4 dimensions are, what are all the groups that you want to get the message to? So we have the model where we have those, and then what are the various topics that we think may be pertinent at the time? So that's the 2nd dimension. The 3rd dimension is how then, for those intersections that are critical, how do you actually connect with those folks? So what you do, so in essence, we're talking about target marketing. So if you pick a particular age group, how do you go about getting that message to them? Is social media the primary message? Is a direct mail? How much is through advertisement? So we put that model together. The fourth element, the 4th dimension is timing. When do you do that? Now the timing has been disrupted a little bit by COVID-19. Now we're kicking it back into gear again. So that's what the basic plan is micro-targeting people for the issues that are of interest to them in a means that gets to them most effectively. So that's how we're approaching it. And I think that that really is the lifeblood, and that's why we do the things we do. That's why we ask for donations, because it's expensive to get all these messages out and do it effectively. I think to your point about race and gender, I think you're right, but I think especially with COVID-19 and what people have seen, I think it's an opportunity for us to circle back around and say, folks, what we've been talking about with regard to security, freedom, and opportunity, those are all near and dear to each of us. And look at where we're going. We have this decision to make. Again, so if you're in the suburbs and you're running a small business, in the past, maybe these things didn't impact you as much. But when you have a governor like Governor Wolf that locks you down and you're at risk of losing your job, losing your business, I think people are probably a little bit more in tune with that right now. So I think they're a little more receptive to the message. And I think if we can do it right, I think the message of security, freedom, and opportunity in the face of what we've seen in 2020 rings true. And I think that at the end of the day, that will help people come and vote for me. And it's going to be a tough election, but everything that we've seen so far, if the trend continues where it's going to be a very close election, but it's going to be winnable. And I think one final point on that, one of the keys is to build a strong volunteer army, because I can only do so much and we can only afford so much. A lot comes down to friend talking to friend, neighbor talking to neighbor. We're starting to build coalitions and that type of thing, but that's a key element as well. So it's not just me doing it, it's everyone who believes in the things that I mentioned during this this town hall. You getting out and talking to your neighbors, talking to your friends, and encouraging them to vote. You know, there's still a lot of people out there in key groups that aren't registered to vote. A couple that come to mind is, well, three that come to mind. The veterans groups. There's still a good number of veterans that aren't registered. We need them. Sportsmen. There's a lot of sportsmen, Second Amendment people that are not registered. We need to get them registered. And even from the standpoint of fellow Christians, they, you know, it's still astounding to me how many people who regularly attend church aren't registered to vote or don't vote. This is a great time to get my famous quote in. It's not my quote, but what people really need to think about, and it goes to your point, bad politicians are elected by good people who don't vote. So I'll restate that. Bad politicians are elected by good people who don't vote. So the next time you hear someone say, well, I'm not registered or I'm not voting because my vote doesn't count, well, share that with them, because they are helping that bad politician get elected and reelected. Until we stand up as a people and kick these people out, drain the swamp, get rid of the deep state, we're going to continue with the same types of struggles that we are seeing today. But it comes down to us. We have to stand up. I can't do it by myself. I need your help. And so help get that message out, and we can prevail in November.
Awesome. Thank you so much. If anyone had any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to John. You can find more information on his website, emmonsforcongress.com. Thank you for joining us this morning. John, did you have anything else to add?
No, I would just say thank you again. Be safe, stay well. And to Hannah's point, there's many opportunities to help the campaign from a volunteer standpoint, even a donation of $10 or $20. 2020 has a nice ring this year. That every bit helps. So I really implore you to go to the website, emmonsforcongress.com, check it out. And if you want to help in any way, shape, or form, contact us. And there's always plenty to do.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Can I interject? Can I say something?
Sure.
Maybe I can't even, I don't know. Yeah, I'm Erwin Zeller, and I just signed on to this a couple of weeks ago on your program here, and I really appreciate it. I agree with everything you say here. I think it's a powerful message. I think you have a very strong platform. And I think the real problem is messaging and communication. And I just see a lot of people are either ignorant of the issues and they don't care about it. I don't know how you get through to those people, but I think what you said today is very, very good. And again, when you talk about maybe these conversations and debating Houlihan and the League of Women Voters, I always think they have a bit of a left-leaning bias, if not prejudices there. And I just wonder, but I guess it really gets down to, in sales, how do you message, how do you communicate, and how do you close the deal? But I know it's a tough situation. And, getting back to these various groups or Hispanics and so forth, somehow there can be individuals within those communities who speak the language, who are really going to be cheerleaders for your campaign, that they can go out and influence these people, whether it's in Southern Chester County or it's up in Berks. But again, I wish you the very best, and I hope that you prevail. And I think, even with regards, we spoke about Trump here and his policies, and, a lot of people don't agree with him but I think on balance, he's done very, very well for this country. But he really needs somebody in support. He needs Congress in support. And you'll notice during the last 4 years, even though he's had good policies and good programs, they have been obstructed by those in Congress. So I think we have to really elect people like John Emmons and throughout this country so they get the Congress behind the president and move forward. Because if we have another 4 years like we just had, even if Donald Trump is reelected, we're going to run into the same problems over and over again, and it'll just be inertia. In fact, it'll be worse than inertia. It'll be stepping backwards. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I couldn't agree more. Yep.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Hannah.